Jason Gilman is principal at JBG Planning here in La Crosse. He has got degrees in landscape architecture and planning from UW-Madison. He has spent 36 years being devoted to helping making our cities, Onalaska, Winona, La Crosse, better places for us to live, work, and play. And I was able to learn and get to know him. I know of one of his superpowers is he's able to really manage smoothly challenging people, plans, and be able to move them forward and doing the right things with integrity. He's an artist, he's a musician, he's a husband, dad, 2 boys, grandfather of 5, and he commits a lot of time to volunteering. He's done guitar lessons at the Boys and Girls Clubs, and he enjoys spending his extra moments being a musician, being outdoors. And so let's welcome Jason.
Thank you for the warm welcome. Volume okay? Yeah. Okay, great. A very inspiring, admirable service, too. I appreciate being here this morning. So what are the questions we're asking ourselves about changing climate? It's reported that fear in communications isn't working very well. It's created pushback. So if not fear of the uncertain future, what will work? What will foster action? Are humans hopelessly motivated by pain and pleasure, and as long as we stay comfortable, there will be little action? Is there anything we can do individually or as a community that will make a difference? These are all questions that are constantly rattling around in my brain. Thomas Paine was quoted to say, we have it in our power to begin the world over again. And when you think about that, there's 2 ways to interpret that. One more hopeful, one more unsettling and formidable. When Matthew asked me to do this short talk, I thought I'm uniquely underqualified because I'm not a climate scientist, nor am I an expert on global geopolitical pressures on the planet. But then I thought I have 40 years experience and I've seen a lot of things in city planning. And planners are sort of uniquely qualified to understand empirical data and other data to advise on policy. In addition, I taught environmental policy at the university. So I'm going to just describe the things I've seen and heard as to how I see climate affecting people, places, and our quality of life. And one thing planners like to look at is through the lens of economic, environmental, social, and cultural outcomes. So that I refer to that as the quadruple bottom line. It's a holistic way of thinking about how policy impacts all of us. Can I bring up the first slide, please? Thank you. This is my son. This is my oldest son, and he's a forest ranger. This is him on a mutual aid project fighting a fire, a 1 million acre fire in California. This is not healthy or safe. He has to breathe in terrible air quality for several weeks while he's working in California. So I wanted to show you this slide because it illustrates how this is affecting all of us. We're not isolated in the upper Midwest. There are things happening to us, to our people, that will affect us. And it will also affect us relative to the way that we're housing people, because California and the wildfires and the things that are going on not only put a lot of pressure on resources, it puts a lot of pressure on materials, building materials, because to rebuild in California or the hurricane-ravaged states, there are these gigantic demands for construction lumber, drywall, everything. And scarcity and demand, of course, creates rising prices, which makes it unattainable for young families to buy homes. Right now, we're, I think, in the La Crosse area, about $350 a square foot for a new stick-built home, which would put a 1,300 square foot home over $500,000. Next slide, please. About 4 years ago, I was invited by the Urban Land Institute to serve on a panel with experts in Blacksburg, Virginia at Mountain Lake Lodge. When they called me and they said I was going to go to where they filmed Dirty Dancing, I was like, wow, that's a unique thing, not what I was expecting. I'm ashamed to say I had not seen the movie up until that point, but I crammed and watched it the night before I left. But in Blacksburg, emerald ash borer has devastated the forests around Mountain Lake Lodge, this beautiful setting. And here in La Crosse, we have disposed of thousands of tons of ash material. And yes, emerald ash borer, which is this green insect here, the spread of that is exacerbated by climate. In 2014, I was a planner in Winona County, and the Minnesota Commissioner on Agriculture came down and said he had a very important message for our county and our board members, something that would be the most concerning thing that we're going to face in the next decades. And I thought, well, what could it be? I was thinking it's got to be maybe economic related or food scarcity relative to agriculture or things like that. And he said, invasive species exacerbated by climate change would be one of the greatest challenges we've got ahead of us. And it's because a lot of these insects and weeds and things that are moving into our area are very difficult to handle, and they damage the things that we grow. Let's go to the next slide, please. And then about 20 years ago, I saw Tia Nelson. This is the daughter of Governor Gaylord, or Senator Gaylord Nelson, who was also governor, and started Earth Day. And she was with a team of UW scientists and was talking about what might we see in the upper Midwest in terms of climate. And she said short duration, high intensity rains would become the norm. And as a city planner, I'm very concerned about short duration, high intensity rains. So I thought, well, we'll keep our eye on this. Is it going to happen, or are we just going to see some kind of, flukes that, where we get big storms? And as you can see from the trending chart here, as well as insurance data for claims relative to damaging storms, they're all going up. And this goes way back to 2004, I think. So it's been on the incline. When I was the planner in Winona County, starting in 2010, I studied the horrible 2007 flood that took lives in Stockton, Minnesota. What happened there, well, and I've also seen it locally here with Bliss Road and the continuing erosion, major inundations that we've had. And also the fact that a lot of our residents on the north side of La Crosse, 1,200 homes, 800 garages, are now suffering from year-long inundation, basement flooding. Whereas historically you could have some water in your basement in the spring, your sump pump might pump it out and you could clean up and get on with it. Now you've got water all the time. So what happened in Stockton was, and this is like a perfect storm when you think about it. You have an aging American farmer who is now 60 years old, I think, on average, with no succession plans because the families are smaller, the kids aren't getting into farming, and one farm family sells out because there's nobody to take over the farm. So they sell to the neighbor. The neighbor doesn't really have any interest in expanding a dairy herd or that sort of thing. So they turn the farm into commodity crops, into corn and soybeans. Corn and soybeans drain like this floor in the church. it's got a high cubic feet per second runoff, as opposed to what we saw 60 years ago in Wisconsin, dairy farms with alfalfa. If you ever walk through an alfalfa field, it's like a jungle at your feet, hard to walk through. Great for stormwater management because it slows everything down, not corn. So Stockton has this, you can imagine this bowl, big watershed that goes up into the hills, and it's mostly commodity crops, and they get an overnight rainfall of, I forget what the number was, it was horrendous, like 8 to 10 inches of rain or something like that. All comes down the valley, erodes the slopes of the rivers, the two rivers that run through Stockton. The trees plug up the underside of the railroad bridges, and it floods fast where people can't get out. And people lost their lives in that flood. So it was short duration, high intensity rain, and also something that's happening on our landscape, which is the disappearance of dairy farms. Next slide, please. The other thing I witnessed in Winona County was exactly what the agriculture commissioner was talking about, and that is the spread of invasive species. This is Oriental bittersweet. I don't know if any of you have seen what this does. I had a fella on Highway 43 call me and ask me if there's anything the county could do to help him. And I came out there interested to see what he was dealing with. And I walked into his woods, and he said, I can't walk through my woods anymore. And I had a hard time believing that, but I started walking through it, and it was impassable. So Oriental bittersweet can grow 30 to 40 feet a year. It completely tangles up existing native vegetation, and it becomes this jungle of impassable material. So as I was sitting there on Highway 43, I noticed at my feet in the gutter line of the highway were these orange seeds that had fallen off the edge of the woods. And we had rain coming that week, and I was thinking to myself, all these seeds are gonna go right down the highway into the stormwater system, into the Mississippi River, and they're gonna get distributed down the river. So what impact will invasive species have on our culture? And rising temperatures, shorter winters, and longer warmer seasons also create favorable conditions for things like ticks and tick-borne illness. And now I have friends that refuse to hike. I'll call them and ask them to go hiking, and it's like too much danger because of tick-borne illness. And my father-in-law almost passed away from viral encephalitis and Lyme's disease a few years ago. So it is a real threat. Next slide, please. 5 to 11. Okay, thank you for that check. Another thing that we're seeing, of course, is water wars, and we're starting to see climate migration. A lot of the think tanks like Brookings, the Urban Land Institute, and others see people moving to the upper Midwest as a result of water shortages and environmental hazards, wildfires, hurricanes, things like that. Predictions for water use in the West are already include ending recreational use, eliminating lawn irrigation, rationing, and more. So you can imagine the impact that'll have on people's lives. So I've been asked by many, how can La Crosse build so many apartments? You know, what's fueling, where are the people coming from? Few think about the migration possibilities caused by climate in the U.S. And this is just a nice map out of the New York Times that shows, you know, some of the things that they're starting to track with regard to climate impact. And I grew up in Two Rivers, Wisconsin, on the Great Lakes, so I rode my bike to Lake Michigan almost every morning in the summer to try to fish salmon. So the watersheds and the aquifers in the water in Wisconsin are very, very dear to my heart, and I worry about policy related to our water. Next slide, please. I also wanted to talk to you about flooding in La Crosse. I mentioned the north side inundation and basements and what's going on. So when you look at the watershed that goes all the way out where the La Crosse River runs into the marsh out to Lake Neshonoc, I studied the USDA maps, the land cover maps, for years to see what was going on in that watershed. And it was the exact same story as Winona County: corn, soybeans, conversion, loss of dairy farms, loss of alfalfa. When rain hits cornfields, those furrows, it runs off fast. And in Wisconsin, unlike Minnesota, we don't have mandatory buffer strips and policies that slow that water. Some farmers do it because they understand, the topsoil loss over time can be very damaging. But I look back at a study, the marsh study from years ago, and noticed that the surface water in La Crosse's marsh was only like 2%. I mean, this is like going back to the mid part of the 20th century. Now it's like a lake. It's silted in, and it's all constant inundation of water. So when you think about flooding, a lot of people say, well, we're protected, the levee system's protecting us, but a lot of people don't see what's going on underneath the ground. The people that have water in their basements all year round. Next slide, please. And then there's insurance. And this is a very disturbing thing too, because one of the impacts of insurance companies toggling back coverage is people can't get mortgages. So more pressure on single-family homes and first-time home buyers, because it's getting more and more expensive and the coverage is less. So this is another trend we're going to be witnessing in the next decade in La Crosse and beyond. Last slide, please. So what can we do? There's so much we can do locally. The message that you talked about earlier, the love molecule, empathy, is so critical, because the people that are affected by climate are oftentimes people that are the least advantaged. When I look at census tracts in the city of La Crosse that are distressed because of poverty levels, those are the areas that the basements are inundated. So always remember that there are a lot of people that are suffering as a result of historic policies that have had an impact on certain populations, and we have to have that love molecule and empathy. We can also teach our children, and my service at the Boys and Girls Club that was mentioned, music is a great inspiration. Arts and culture is a great inspiration. Ask Emerson and Thoreau and Audubon and what happened with regard to environmental policy, because the arts were involved in that. And I don't know if any of you have seen the new Bob Dylan movie with Pete Seeger. I mean, it reminds us the way that music and arts can impact things. We also have to have an eye on policy. For too long, the Wisconsin DOT has had policies related to congestion mitigation, which includes build more lanes, more roads. And what that has shown in Houston and LA is that you can never build your way out of congestion. You just keep building more and more lanes. And the future of that is that we will see areas north of Holmen. Holmen, when you look at Holmen on Google Earth, it's bigger than the city of La Crosse. It'll completely be filled with houses because we will have created induced demand through road building. Instead, we need better land use planning. We got to put people closer to services, closer to transit, closer to things. Land use planning should be the controlling factor, not building more lane miles. And Madison's mayor, Soglin, before the current mayor, noted that real estate prices were going up so high in the city of Madison that the poor were getting pushed into the suburbs. And he said the suburbs are a terrible place for the poor. They don't have access to anything. They don't have bus lines. They don't have food. They have to rely on vehicles. So we have to think smarter about land use planning. Energy design, smart technology can contribute to affordable housing as well as urban infill. And we also need to relocate people with dignity. because there will be areas that we'll have to redevelop. And our food systems need to change. This is the victory gardens that I created when I was the planning director and COVID started. And we need that kind of food system locally. And then lastly, I think, things like keeping our street trees and backyard gardens in place and limiting our weekend shopping habits to limit what goes into the landfill. I sat on the solid waste policy board, and I used to go out and watch trucks dump, and it's sobering to see what comes out of those trucks and what we're burying. So when you go to the store, and I'm guilty too, so I'm not chastising anybody, but I'm much more careful now about what I buy. Is this going to last me? Is this something I can give to my children, or is it going to end up in the landfill? So thank you, and I'm happy to take any comments or questions that you might have. I hope I gave you a few things that you might not have thought about relative to climate in the La Crosse area. Thank you.